Well, I haven't had an introduction like that before in any of the 40-odd party meetings up and down the country that I've spoken at before now. So thanks very much. I'd obviously like to thank Blackburn and the North West region for having me up here this Thursday evening. Now, we've just had a general election, and I think the first thing that came across to me on the night of the election and the day thereafter was how well the party did nationally. Obviously, there were a few poor votes, you know, in the margins and in regions where we're not strong. But the Advisory Council said we should really stand in 110 seats plus. There was a bit of mission creep up to about 120 seats. But broadly speaking, we got good, solid votes, particularly in areas where we've got support, where we've got councillors on the ground and where we've got demography. People know who we are and voted for us in an explicit way. Because you have to face it, we weren't going to get a single member of Parliament elected. But people voted for us, not because they wanted to vote against the party, or because they wanted to protest, or recycle their vote, or cock a snook, or stick two fingers up at other parties. They wanted to vote directly for this party, which was blacklisted and ignored for much of the election. A little bit of response from the media 5 to 4 weeks in, but in the 3 weeks prior to polling, hardly a dicky bird. There was a lot about the chairman's court case in the run-up to the run-up of the election, but in the actual election period, there was little concentration on us, little on UKIP, to be fair, but they're a single-issue movement concentrated on Europe. Quite a degree of playing the Greens up, a little bit of attention to Kilroy Silk and his Veritas party that bombed at the election, like UKIP, who virtually lost 80 to 90% of all of their deposits in the 500 seats that they stood in throughout the country. Whereas we got some very decent votes, 1,900, 2,000, 2,100, 3,500, 4,000, 5,500, 16.9%, 17% in Barking, down in the Overspur in London, where our people have largely moved to get away from what's gone on in inner London during the last 30 to 40 to 50 years. And where, of course, we have councillors. One of the reasons for that vote in Barking and elsewhere is because there are councillors in Epping Forest, there are councillors in Loughton, there was a councillor in Thurrock, there is a councillor got over 50%, an ex-taxi driver in Broxbourne, in Hertfordshire. So where there is support on the ground and where people know you can win and they see that it's not a wasted vote, they vote for you because they know that you're there. And you can see, even in certain of the fringe UKIP and Veritas votes, just occasionally, that people have looked down a list of candidates. They've seen New Labour, they've seen Kennedy's Liberal Democrats, they've seen Howard's Tories, and they've looked for a right populist party somewhere in the list. And they haven't found the BNP, so they voted UKIP or Veritas. But it proves that even nationwide, in relatively inhospitable areas, there is a right populist vote. A vote that's to the right of the Tories, that's cross-class, that's based primarily at the moment on ex-Labour voters who feel completely betrayed by New Labour, but can also draw in angry third, middle-class types, ex-Tories and so on. Because everybody knows that this country is societally and culturally, if not economically yet, in very great decline. And it's been declining decade on decade and year on year and generation on generation since the late 40s and early 1950s. Now, Blair's in hospital at the moment, apparently, with a slipped disc. What a pity, eh, poor old chap. But he's going to retire soon anyway, and Brown is going to take over. Now, the difference between Brown and Blair is as nothing. It's just a tobacco leaf, a piece of paper that's put between the two of them. It's true that some of the old Labour types prefer Brown because he's a bit more dour, he's a bit more sort of comfortable from a trade union type background, but in actual fact there's absolutely no difference between them. And haven't people realised that in every cabinet meeting that decided on the Iraq War, that decided on everything else, Brown was sat next to Blair at every vote and in relation to every discussion? There is absolutely no difference between them at all. And if we notice that at the last election, the one before last, Labour got 44% of the vote. And a third to 40% of our people, of all people in the society, didn't even bother to vote anyway. This time, 60% voted, 40% didn't, and Labour's down to 35%. 35% of those who bothered to vote.
They've got the lowest proportion of our people and of any people to vote for them to form a government. And they've got a majority of 60 to 70, which governments in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s would have killed for a majority like that. And they've got it again with 35% of the vote and grinding down. Before Blair became Premier in 97, Labour had 425,000 members nationally. It's now 235,000 and dipping. And all of the parties, with the exception of the Liberal Democrats, who are growing because of left hostility to the way Labour is in office and because of Muslim and ethnic votes, other than the Liberal Democrats, no party really in the society, apart from ourselves, has any energy. I heard a debate halfway through the elections, about 2 weeks into the 3.5 to 4 week campaign, although actually that campaign had been going on for 6 months. No wonder politics bores people to death, except when it's associated with this organisation primarily, because it goes on far too long. And in some ways, democracy is endless. We have too many tiers of government, and we have too many devolved assemblies, and we have too much plebiscitary democracy, and yet many of our people have actually no power to decide real issues, like the composition of the population of Blackburn, for example. I was told on the way here that Blackburn is 20% Asian. Now, I didn't realise that before I got here. But 20%. Did anyone in this room, did anyone who doesn't share the politics of people in this room, who is white and English or British, vote for Blackburn to have its ethnic composition changed to the degree that it has been since Labour passed under Attlee the Nationality Act in 1948? And the answer is, no, they did not. No one has asked for this. No one has asked for a great wedge of liberal left reforms since the late 1960s on the family, on immigration, on law and order, on homosexuality, on membership of what is now called the European Union. No one's asked for any of these. No one apart from small elites, Tory, Liberal and Labour, at the top, in the Commons and elsewhere, and in Europe to a degree since the early 70s, has ever voted for any of this. And whenever any of these core matters come near democracy, the elite starts getting into a panic. And this is what's happening in relation to this European Constitution. It's one of these few occasions when, for essentially foolish reasons, and because of the premises of Sir James Goldsmith's referendum party way back, actually, they've decided to give us a vote on some of these core issues. Whether we have a constitution, boring, that federates us to a state in Europe that we've never really asked to be a member of. And they're surprised that there's a big British majority that says no. We don't want to be part of this other state because we've got a nation state of our own. And the political elite is running around saying, oh, it's terrible, isn't it, these ignorant plebs. You know, we're giving them a plebiscitary insight into our elite affairs. It's disgraceful when these people know nothing about it. And it will be the same, as they perceive, and it will be the same on the currency. And it will be the same on hanging for murder. And it will be the same on the treatment that ought to be meted out to paedophiles. And it will be the same on family-based issues. And it will be the same in relation to the mass ethnic demographic changes which have occurred in the society since 1948. On all of these issues, you have a gulf between the population and the elite. Occasionally, there were people in the elite who were lightning conductors for sentiment from quote-unquote below. Alan Clark, Enoch Powell, a few others. But essentially, they have gone. Although each election, every 4 years, the Tories try to reconnect with an element of their electoral base to get them out on the night, and with a part of the general population. Don't forget, they were in government between 79 and 97. They were in government between 70 and 74. They were in government between 51 and 64. They were in government for most of the period between 1880 and now, actually, although New Labour have encompassed an elite of their own, which looks as though it's going to go on and on and on, because increasingly the Tories are nowhere. And lots of people who used to join them because they wanted power, they didn't give a damn what the party alleged it stood for. They wanted power in terms of middle-class economic welfare. That's what you join the Tories for. And the Tories don't offer people power anymore, which is why they're stumbling from election to election. They put on 30 seats, and their own tame media, the Express and the Mail and so forth, said it was a great triumph because they weren't devastated. A great triumph to keep your vote from 2001 going back to 97, to get your core vote out, to not put on one more vote, and to remain flatlining where you were. And the reason that the Tories try and reconnect with their electoral base every election is because they know that there are many issues where the Liberal elite of which they are actually a part and a subservient member are totally out of kilter and completely out of step with the people in general circumstances in this society. And they know it, and they also slightly fear it, because the one thing that prevents all of the votes for the BNP, upwards of 200,000 at the last general election, upwards of 800,000 plus at the European elections, from translating into seats in a national parliament, is the absence of a proportionate system. Many Liberals, gnawing at the edges of things, desiring to almost sort of coil the rope from which they themselves can be sort of done in at a later date, are campaigning rigorously for PR. Every day or every other day, The Independent, a tiny little elite Liberal paper that sells less than 100,000 copies a day, actually, is campaigning for proportionate voting, which of course would allow and let in candidates from this party to most tiers of government within the United Kingdom, particularly within England and especially in Yorkshire. One of the reasons I understand the Yorkshire Post is so anti this party is because there's a big bedrock of vote there that can get people in at local, district level and can even begin to get up to 10% plus in many Westminster constituencies. Halfway throughout the election campaign, Radio 4 had a debate amongst various sort of political scientists, journalists, commentators and others. And one of them said, why is the turnout so low? Why do people hate politicians so much? Why is there so much indifference? And why people are bored rigid with this election? And a few of them shuffled uneasily in their seats, this place had a few, And they said, look, we've got the system that we have. People feel betrayed by Blair's government. And people said, oh yes, but there's always the danger they can vote for these right-wing populist and anti-immigration parties, They didn't specify which party, UKIP, Veritas, but in a sense, they're really talking about this political organisation. They can vote for them, and one of them pipes up instantly, well, thank God we haven't got PR. Because the Westminster village election system of first past the post corrals everything into the Tory and Labour areas. It always used to be the case that a wing of the Labour Party was actually socialist in belief. And a wing of the Tory party did have certain patriotic views, but both of those phalanxes have gone. They've completely gone. And the reason why 1/3 to 40% of our people don't even vote, and the reason why people are sort of feel trapped into voting for the big blocs, and many people vote Liberal just to protest. My father votes Liberal. He said, I don't like the other two. You're an extremist, he tells me, and I don't like the other two. And I say, well, Dad, why did you vote at all then? He said, I said, look, the Liberals want to decriminalise A, B and C category drugs. He said, I don't want to hear that. And I said, they want sex education for 5-year-olds and above in primary schools. He said, I don't want to hear that. He said, they want to adopt the euro and get rid of pound sterling. He said, do they really? I said, well, you're voting for them. And he said, oh, you're just a troublemaker. And I said, why don't you vote Tory like you always used to? He said, oh, no, I'm not voting for Howard. I don't like him. And I said, oh, okay. I said, what about Brown? Because you really vote Blair, get Brown. He said, no, I couldn't tolerate communism. So I said, Kennedy's Liberals are slightly to the left of New Labour, actually. He said, it's also complicated. He said, I just can't stand it. I said, well, maybe you shouldn't have a vote anyway. Dangerous thoughts, And he said, well, maybe I shouldn't. We fought in the war for a vote. And I said, yes, you did, Dad, and now you're going to vote Liberal Democrat. And he said, but you don't want homosexual marriage? You don't want a federal Europe? Kennedy was the only leader of a representative party in Britain who said mass immigration is a good thing. You never hear New Labour leaders, although they endorse it completely, say so too blatantly, and the Tories say, come on in. Everyone can come in and work for the minimum wage as labour and capital moves around the world in a global system, but we don't like it, and there are these appalling asylum seekers. Have you seen the cover of the Mail today? But the Liberals say it's marvellous, it's wonderful, it's humane, it's what we voted for when we set the UN up, it's everything we ever wanted. But you vote for them, Dad, you feel free to do so. But many people vote Liberal because they can't stand the other two blocks. My experience of this society is that there are fewer hardcore Liberals than there are hardcore patriotic people. You find in your own lives people who really think political correctness is a good thing. Yes, who really think race awareness courses and sexual identity courses for civil servants and related bureaucrats are good things. Who really think that policemen in the Metropolitan Police should be sent on these sorts of things, and we are paying for all of these things. You never find them. You never find them outside the mass media, small parts of the arts, small parts of the entertainment industry, and essentially bits of the academy. Tiny, small elites in and around London pretty much. But in the mass of the population, you never find them. You never find people who say, mass immigration, come on in, what a marvellous boon it's been to us all. And there's been a degree to which every popular instinct of our people has been channeled into areas such as football and drinking and having a good time and Friday and Saturday night, as the society, as its level, as its culture, as its propensity to crime gets worse and worse and worse. And Blair will say that he's going to stamp down on yobbery. Although the yob is a politically incorrect term, actually, hasn't anyone told them. There's a degree to which he's going to do something about disorder in the streets. Disorder in the streets? We've sent a third of our army to Iraq. This week we've sent 500 more troops to Iraq to train the new client regime to hold their own people down at America's bequest. We've spent, I think it's about £7.25 billion already on our involvement in the Iraq war. The Blair regime doesn't control the streets in South London. It doesn't control the streets in South London, but we have sent a third of our army and a quarter of our tanks to Basra and southern Shia Iraq to control that situation. When 1 million of our people of indeterminate political views, many of them leftists and pacifists admittedly, marched against that war, and Tony said he was listening. I hear you, he said, and then went straight in with Bush. And now he's in again, and he says from his bed, as he lies there prone, holding his back, he says, I'm listening, he says, this is his new thing. He's listening to his MPs, he's listening to his shadow cabinet, he's listening to all of us. Well, why doesn't he listen up and say that our people never voted for a multiracial or a multicultural society? They didn't vote for most liberal, allegedly progressive and reformist measures which have come in the last 40 years. They didn't vote for the criminality which increasingly in the cities and elsewhere resembles the United States. 77,000 in prison now. And yet prison quite clearly does not work, does it? It doesn't work. We're going to have 3 categories for murder now, like in America up to a degree, sort of A, B, first and second degree homicide, and then a manslaughter residual category. There used to be a time, in this country when a murder, particularly a sexual murder or a murder of a child, for example, was absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. It would convulse the media for weeks, if not for months. There's a murder a week in Bristol. There's a murder a day in London. There's a murder every other day in Glasgow. It's become routine. It's become routine throughout this society because drugs are everywhere. Criminal gangs are everywhere. Because a psychopathic paedophile went mad in Scotland about 10 years ago in Dunblane, they banned handguns all over the country. And we can't even have our Olympic and Commonwealth teams train with handguns. They have to go to the Channel Islands Strait France. They have to go to the Republic of Ireland. There are 1 million illegal guns in the possession of criminal gangs of multiple ethnicity since that came in alone. And many of those weapons have come in from Serbia and the ex-Balkans. They've come in from Northern Ireland as the paramilitary groups have got rid of their old and spent gear. And they've also just been replicas and all sorts of other things that have been stolen and adapted and used in various ways. And the reason that we have so much trouble and so much criminality and so many youth problems on the streets, and everyone sees it. People privatise themselves. If they've got money, they live behind walls, they live behind grills, they have private estates, they have things that you have to press multiple buttons to get into the corridor that leads to another one that leads to their flat somewhere up there. But they can all see it. Everyone, from the roughest estate to the old Billy in the centre of London, they can all see it as the tide either laps around their door or comes nearer to them. And the reason that we have so much of it is because there is no discipline and no order in the society. And the police are now firemen. If somebody's bleeding in the street and there's glass around their head, they'll come. And they'll come when it's over. Because they don't want any trouble, you know. And they'll come to pick up the pieces when it's over. When there's really serious crime, they'll put a regional or national crime squad on it, and they'll deal with it. Quite close to where my family lives, actually, there was quite a notorious case recently where 2 girls were abducted and gang raped and tortured and killed, or one of them was killed, and dumped in a park in the Thames Valley to the west of London. Now, they put the regional and national crime squad, our sort of sub-FBI, our FBI in the making on this, and they got this gang, Islamic gang, of multi-ethnicity, some of them are Albanians, who are from South London. They got them within a week. But this was part of its believed gang-related violence, because one of the girls was living in a hostel that had been firebombed by this group the week before. So obviously something is going on. But this proliferation of criminality around drugs, particularly around crack cocaine, is happening in towns and in cities and in provincial centres, including areas of the country where habitually it's not really necessarily thought that that sort of thing goes on. But it is going on because it's spreading out of London, it's spreading down from Birmingham, it's spreading out of cities in the northwest. It's been here for a long time anyway, in the centre of Manchester and in other zones. And it's because our state has lost its grip. And it's lost its grip because it's intoxicated with ideas that mean you can't keep certain tendencies in society down. Because you have to be tough-minded about the nature of human nature. Labour MP, I can't remember his name now, the one who's influenced by certainly Anglican and socially Christian ideas, said that for the first 2 terms of Labour's government, from 97 to just about now, Labour had a naive view of human nature. That human beings are naturally good. This is called the Pelagian belief in philosophy. That human beings are naturally good. And that all you need is to change a few structures and spend a bit of money and consult the community. Well, the truth is that human nature is not like this, and it has never been like this. And you have to have structures of order and discipline for people. You have to give people a space. Our people always demand the right to say what they think and within limits be who they are. And that's being restricted on all sorts of other fronts now, coming from a different direction. But there is a low-level degree of chaos now in this society. And we have a situation where the bulk of the citizenry are between the state and armed gangs. The only people who are armed in the society are semi-organised crime and the state. Everyone else is in the middle. Waiting, hoping problems won't afflict them and theirs, because we'll be all right. And as many people in my father's generation, without personalising it through him, and people slightly younger say, I'll be dead in 20, 30 years. I hear this all the time from people. I won't be here to see it. I won't be here to see it. I met a chap who's a moderate Republican recently from Ireland. Non-violent one, a nationalist one. And he said in 50 years, Ireland will have, this is the Republic of Ireland, will have a non-white majority. In 50 years. It's probably 60 or 70 actually, but you know, who's counting, you know. The truth is that if they have the immigration that South London's had in 60 years, they'll be in a minority in their own country. All this IRA violence against us, all this fighting for their own independence and so on, it won't matter a damn. They'll be in a minority in their own country. What was it all for? What was it all for? But factoring it out from then to look at ourselves, more importantly, what has it been for if we become a minority in our own cities, in our own inner cities, in our own country? And what will it do to our culture, which increasingly, and I'm the sort of cultural officer of this party, vast numbers of our people know nothing about. Nothing about. You know, posh and best is not English culture, or it's not what it's about. It's just a sort of irrelevance fed by mass media. Many of our people go through school and they are taught to partly despise what they are and where they have come from. Anything which is cultured is posh, is elitist, is not for us, it's against us. Sort of median capitalist and low-level trash is all that we want or will get or are fit for. Our people do no national service. Our people know nothing about the empire. Many of our people know nothing of our great musicians and artists and writers, and even prior political leaders. A quarter of all school children doing government in school from 14 to 16, government, can't name the party in power, New Labour. We face everywhere a degree of blind ignorance in who we are and what we are. Because if you want to basically break a population down, you remove the mental tier first. Because then people are adrift and are aimless and are wandering about. And that's why politics bores them. That's why Blair and Howard and Haig and Duncan Smith and Kennedy and Steele and Ashdown and Kinnock and the other Smith who died hiking on a Scottish mountain and Blair took over and Brown after him, that's why they bore our people rigid. There's almost a sort of manic depressive element to many of our people. I know loads of Labour voters and they hate Labour and they voted them back. I met a chap before the election who said, I can't stand Blair, I absolutely loathe the bloke's guts, but I'll vote him back. And I said, well, why? Why don't you stay at home? Why do it? He said, oh, there's nothing else, is there? The Liberals are nothing. The Tories couldn't vote for them. And you either don't vote or vote Labour. And it's because, in a sense, people think that there is no other option, that this party will continue to grow from the outside in. The problem it faces is twofold. The first problem is, you're all right, but you can't win, which is what people say. And the second is demonisation, that people are sort of frightened. I've had people stand up in meetings and say to me, will they, whoever they are, I suppose in a sort of general sense the establishment, will they know if I vote for the British National Party? Well, I say firstly, who cares, and secondly, tens and tens of thousands of people, voting on plebiscites for parties at elections. The system's not bothered about that. It's only when there's enough people massed together that a representation ensues. Then they'll get worried. And they are worried. Even by that voting barking, Labour's had a special internal commission since the election about how they roll that back, as they would call it in inverted commas, within that borough. The MP says she's going to relocate all of their office from Westminster, from these swanking offices that cost just under £1 billion and are on the other side of St Stephen's Gate, opposite Parliament Square. She's going to relocate all of that back to Barking because she says she's going to plug into the white working class again. That's what she said. It tells you something about her, doesn't it? She's going to plug into the white working class again because people feel let down, she said. Well, people feel let down because we're subject to endless change in our borough and people who are old feel nervous about it. And the BBC did a vox pop. They went out into the streets of Barking and people said, no, I never voted for them. Quite clearly lying. They got some Irish chap who said, oh yes, I voted National Front. But you know what he meant. They had another woman saying, I'm not against anyone and I haven't said anything, but I voted for them. It's almost as if put the chains on and lead me away, isn't it? Because the BBC were there. But you can and the only reason that vote happened is because activists, for about 4 months before the election, went door to door. Tens of thousands of doors. They basically were many multiple occupancy and so on. They went door to door. And they demystified the party. And they de-demonised it at the level of the street. And because that happened, you then got the response, oh, you're not like that then. Because they expect no hair, sort of your knuckles on the pavement. This is what they expect. This is what they expect. And if they don't get it, there's a sort of scales drop. And they think, oh, all right, we'll vote for that then. Because it's the equivalent of voting for the flags behind the speakers here on this table tonight. That's all. And of course, when that happens, you'll see the reversal. When all the people who put their St George's Cross flags out when England play, when the people who supported the rugby team in the World Cup down in Australasia, without necessarily knowing the rules of that game, just because it was England, and just because the team was almost all white, subliminally. When people feel that they can vote for the BNP, and it's as normal as that, as normative as that, as given as that, when they feel that that is normalcy for them, then you will almost have to restrain some of our own people in their own ardour. But that's the other way round from the situation that we now face. Because we face a population that's coward, that's slightly afraid, that's traumatised by the attention of mass media, that when they're not with people they know look behind them slightly before they make a dangerous or illiberal or politically incorrect remark. It's remarkable, you know. People who know nothing about politics, people who couldn't name you half New Labour's cabinet as if that's of any importance, they know what political correctness and incorrectness is. When they make a remark of some sort which they think's a bit iffy, you know, at work or with somebody they think ought not to know where they come from politically, even in just a moment, they'll look behind them. And even if they don't look behind them physically, they're doing it mentally and morally and emotionally. And this is a country that once ruled a quarter of the world. And our people are frightened, except in certain gatherings and in pubs late at night and with their own family, to say what they think about how their cities and towns have changed since 48. About how there are at least 6 million plus non-whites in the country. It's at least 10% now. Whatever the statistics, whatever the last census said and didn't say, that's the fact. Just look around you. And we have a situation now where Blair sees no problem. Blair sees no problem in what has happened. The Oldham riots were all down to this party, apparently, and its satanic machinations. The fact that groups transplanted from different parts of the world will have different agendas from different forms of culture, look askance at each other in certain situations, and will come into conflict in relation to scarcity, even if that conflict is just democratic. That will happen and has happened and is happening. All American cities are racially zoned. People know where they can go and they know where they don't go. All American police departments basically have different racial criteria for how they deal with and police different sections of their own urban and semi-urban spaces. We are going to follow that. It's already begun in London. There are schools in Luton which are 90% Asian and 90% Muslim, and they teach their own way of looking at life, which is totally legitimate biologically and culturally for them. But it's not legitimate for us, and we never wanted it in our country. And we never asked for it. And even when we ruled them, we never imposed similar dispensations upon them, even under the Raj, up to its disestablishment in and around 48, when independent countries emerged in the Indian subcontinent. Because a people are what they are racially, and everything begins on from that. Now, you meet liberals all the time who say that the greatness of culture, the greatness of science, the greatness of law and of art, of everything high, it's got nothing to do with race at all. It's all nasty people with horrible ideas to say that. But in actual fact, you will lose what you have and what you have been and what you are and what your children will be if that connection is broken down. But our people are deeply worried about that. They're deeply worried about the politics of race. If ever a BNP spokesman appears, usually with some demonic lead-up in the mass media, they will say, "Are you a racist? Nick Griffin, are you a racist?" Blah, blah, blah. Whoever it is, Doc Edwards, whoever is on the media at that time. And the truth of the matter is, of course, that race is the basis of meaningful cultural and national politics. The term racism was coined by Leon Trotsky, the Soviet communist leader, in 1927. That's where it comes from. But it's been used now to keep you out of the debate before you even open your mouth. The truth of the position is that all groups are in favour, ultimately, of the power of their own kind and of their own group, and of their manifold manifestations in culture, in art, in science, in law, in statecraft, in military power, in forms of the state, in just the building of a place to live, like Blackburn here or any place else. Each group manifests itself in order to live and in order to survive and in order to have a natural habitat and a country and a land and a language and various forms of spirituality for itself. Which is why, when people around you and in your families and in the communities in which you live tell you that they're bored to the back teeth with politics and that they're all the same, you can tell them that there's one party in the country, and almost everybody, no matter how stupid, bluntly, knows the name of this party. They know the name of this party. Many of them couldn't even name your MP and know that he used to march against the Vietnam War and has now voted for the war in Iraq, which as Foreign Secretary he superintends in Blair's regime. If he was a student, he'd have to throw eggs at himself. As he once remarked, people couldn't even name him in this town. Those lads shouting outside that window, they couldn't even probably name him and what his departmental and ministerial responsibilities are. But they know what this party is. They actually know what this party is. And why do they? Because it's the opposition to straw and easy material, to what he represents in Blackburn and elsewhere. It's the opposition to liberalism, to drift, to mass criminality, to homosexuality as a fake marital union, to mass immigration and the loss of our cities, to the denigration of our past, to merging our state into a nation state in Europe that we don't wish to be part of, although we wish no ill to white people living in Europe, but we wish to govern ourselves. And even the lads outside, for whom politics is sort of a football chant, know that this is the party that ultimately stands for them, is the opposition to that which exists and governs us now, and is gradually, painfully, slowly coming in from the margins of the society towards the centre. Because 50 years from now, this party will be talked about as one of the movements which came out from the population to confront the decline and defeat which has gone on for 50 years, and which will help by itself or with others from amongst our people to reverse its damaging effects. I thank you very much for your indulgence and ask you to put your hands together.